For her opening remarks, please.
Thank you.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF team.
It just shows that the show goes on with or without the IMF.
Could you ask
Hashtag economic independence.
Mike, Dr. Umar Ram
So it's good to be here again, and
For her opening
thank you
remarks.
for inviting you to be here.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on with or without the IMF.
Could you ask
Hashtag economic independence.
Mike, Dr. Umar Ram
So it's good to be a conversation, and
For her opening
thank you
remarks.
for inviting the right approach.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on with or without the IMF.
Could you ask
It's a hashtag economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on with or without the IMF.
Could you ask
It's a hashtag economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
Mike, Dr.
So good to be a conversation, and thank you for inviting the right way forward.
Welcome and welcome to the IMF
I
team.
want to talk very quickly shows that the show goes on because that provides economic independence.
What we have got
Mike,
institutional change that is being proposed is going to
welcome
give
and
you
welcome to the
the
IMF team.
second line of this type that you're going to be guaranteed stability. I would like to talk about what we have got where my fellow panelists are trying to shift the conversation into strong change. I want to talk about what are the implications for the exchange. It's going to give
and
you
welcome to the
the second line of this type. And let me start not with the exchange guarantees, but with carrots. I would like to talk about what we have got where when you go to the supermarket and you notice that carrots are cost, I want more on the implication last month for you. It's going to give you the second line. And let me start not with the exchange guarantee. There are two possibilities with carrots. One possibility I would like to know is that what we've got, there was a, when you go to the call, a rail shop, and in the market for tariffs. Something particularly impatient last month. There was a going to Elizabeth, the second line. So there was a short price tariff. Let me start not with the exchange. There are two possible tariff prices. One relative like is that what we've got there was a the other real shock is that in the market for tariffs. Something particularly impatient. Flowers cost going to Elizabeth, the second line. So there was a short price tariff. Let me start not with the exchange. Tariffs have gone up in line with one relative like is that what we've got there was a the other possibility now is that in the market for tariffs. Something particularly in one sense exchange rate is just a second line. So there was a short price. Let me start not with the exchange. Tariffs have gone up in line with one relative like was that what we've got there was in terms of the other possibility now is that factors tariffs have gone up in line with one relative in one sense there was the other possibility now let me start with the market tariffs have gone up in line with one relative was that you see how the other possibility now these factors tariffs have gone up in line with one relative was that there was the other possibility now let me start with the market tariffs have gone up in line with one sense just so the other possibility let me start with the market tariffs have gone up in line with one relative was that there was the other possibility now these factors tariffs have gone up in line with one relative was that there was the other possibility now let me start with the market tariffs have gone up in line with one relative was that so and the minister and the mission chief are telling us that we can bank on, it means that the inflation component is now taken out of the exchange rate. So when we talk about a stable exchange rate going forward, we're really only talking about that one component, that the inflation component that has been giving us predictable depreciations year after year after year is no longer going to take place. However, there are still going to be factors, real shocks, particular to the foreign exchange market, that is going to affect the exchange rate. And as you can see from the history, these shocks to the exchange rate market can cause the exchange rate to go up and down for relatively long periods of time. In fact, these shocks can be permanent. We can have a permanent realignment from 135 to 1 to 140, but it has to be something particular to the foreign exchange market. Here's one last lesson for what to expect from the exchange rate going forward. Those shocks can affect the exchange rate in either direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Okay, so I think where we probably should start, there are 3 areas we'll probably need to look at. Accountability and governance, and I believe 1, the whole exchange rate, competitiveness of the exchange rate, 2, and 3rd, we'd like to probably look at the monetary policy transmission, the elements of monetary policy transmission, and the efficiency of that process. Okay, so these are 3 areas. I think since Damien ended on this note of exchange rate, can we now look at and showing us periods of when the currency is undervalued and overvalued. For our currency to be competitive, the real exchange rate, this is a variable that is monitored. We have heard the central bank speak to it. We have heard even the IMF speak to it. The currency is fairly valued at this point in time. It's not overvalued, it's not undervalued. But this is not a number that is static. This number moves. That value of that currency moves. You have global movements in currencies. For example, over this past year, we have seen where currencies in Sri Lanka, in Mexico, and all of these international currencies have moved by 9, 5, 6, 9, 10, 20%. We have had currencies move. Jamaica has probably moved 6% in the same period. In that same period, how do we maintain competitiveness? Will the real effective exchange rate be a variable that is monitored as a monetary, probably a secondary, but as a monetary policy objective, visible to the public? I mean, can we start with, let's start with Uma.
We just discussed, can you hear me? We just discussed price stability as the variable for monetary policy. That's the objective. So everything else informs what is happening for monetary policy decision making. So in terms of whether we can make the real effective exchange rate as an objective of monetary policy, that's not the idea. We are talking here about price stability. So real effective exchange rate is an important variable for determining competitiveness, but it's not the variable to monitor for price stability. What real effective exchange rate does is to indicate what is Jamaica's competitiveness. How competitive is Jamaica relative to its trading partners? So if Jamaica's exchange rate is depreciating faster than what would be expected of the inflation differential with its trading partners, then we say that it is depreciating in real terms, and that makes, if it is deviating from, if it is at an equilibrium in a long-term sense, then it would be deviating slightly, depreciating farther from that. But real effective exchange rate is a medium-term concept. It is not an everyday concept that you monitor to determine your economic decision making. And so the real effective exchange rate therefore has to be put in a context of medium term, depending on how I see the economic policies evolving as we go forward. Is there any adjustment I need to make to the policy today in order to make sure that the competitiveness is maintained over the medium term? So that's what it is trying to achieve.
Yes, thank you. There is also the question, when we have periods when the currency is overvalued, then it becomes cheaper to import than to produce. And therefore, those are decisions that we take. And therefore, we move from value added to it's cheaper to import. So therefore, it's a variable that needs to be monitored over the medium term, I agree. Governor, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, I think it's an important item. As Uma says, it's not really, you can't focus on that from day to day, week to week, quarter to quarter. That's going to be looking at the wrong thing. But I think it's important to reflect and just remember, I mean, that a lot of what happens when the exchange rate moves sharply and there's a fear pattern sets in and people get very nervous. I mean, the rate is a part of it, yes, but I think as important, if not more important for many people, is that it signals and has always signaled shortage. It has signaled the fact that you can't get it. So if you have a business you're trying to run, the concern is about liquidity. Will I actually be able to pay my bill in dollars? And so it's the need or the imperative of a business to have to do that, or anybody, that often then drives exchange rate movements as people rush to get at this scarce commodity. So I do want to make the point that I think a lot of what we're talking about in the exchange market and the B-Fixit and so on, these are mechanisms that are aimed at, as we move away from the price concern, to make sure we are actually completely settling that fear about liquidity. A lot of this reform is aimed at making sure that the foreign exchange market serves that key purpose of making sure if you want it, you can get it, okay? And making sure and guaranteeing that is a lot of what we're dealing with. So you end up with the price stability objective, keeping general price levels down. You have flexibility in the exchange rate, but in a context where supply to a business, to an individual, is going to be there when they need it. And, you know, over time, I think we should expect to see that the kind of lower, trying to use Damien's general inflation point, that as we work with lower, consistent low inflation, you know, the exchange rate movements will be generally lower unless some shock has happened in the world, like, you know, people are still analyzing why did all these currencies that Keith mentioned fall, you know, drop so severely. Jamaica actually dropped less than many of our neighbors, much less, actually. But how come that happened? And that you have to look at what happened in the US, what happened to trade, what happened to Mr. Trump's announcements, and all sorts of variables in the world that we live in, just like with the oil price and other commodities.
All right, thank you. A quick comment, Nigel?
I'll pass to that one. You can move to
Okay, all right. We're going to take two questions from the audience. Since we're on exchange rate right now, we still have some more questions, but we can take some questions from the audience.
It's become a boring subject.
Question over here.
Hi, Dr. King, you know, I'm your host, anxiety student, so I'll ask you a silly question. When you spoke, you did not factor purchasing power parity into the exchange rate, and I got the impression that inflation was going to be taken out of the equation. Could you clarify for me purchasing power parity, therefore, going forward, and how it will affect the exchange rate?
Purchasing power parity is reflected in the exchange rate moving just to keep up with the inflation difference. So what you saw in the history of Jamaica's exchange rate over the last 20 years is, in fact, the exchange rate trying to maintain purchasing power parity over the long run. And I mean, I looked at the last 20 years for this presentation, but the calculation I did actually went back 50 years, and it holds up over 50 years. So purchasing power parity was evidence in what I presented.
Okay, another one.
on the same topic there, with the correlation between the movement in the U.S. inflation and our the dollar, the price of the dollar. Two things I'm wondering if you took account from. First thing, you kind of saying that it's based on imported goods, aggregate demand of the United States, basically driving our exchange rate here. We do not import 100%, so therefore I would think that it should be a little bit below the movement on the graph in the United States, and also what happens when there is a revaluation of the U.S. currency.
Which question for? Stephen? Damien?
Well, a revaluation or an appreciation or depreciation of the US currency driven by some real event, some real shock is the term we've been using in relation to the US currency, is one of those factors that is going to drive our exchange rate to depart from simply what the inflation difference tells us. So the point I was making is that now we are down to only looking at those factors. And we don't have to look at the inflation factor anymore to the same degree as we did before.
Okay, thank you. Over the past year, we have seen the currency appreciate and depreciate. And we have seen communication from the central bank around that we should see where this currency will appreciate and will depreciate, but at the end of the day, it will even out around where purchasing power parity, inflation rate differential. Now, going forward, when we have these depreciation movements, as the governor spoke to earlier, when the currency depreciates, there's a lot of fear, and becomes very topical, and the world is collapsing around us. When the currency appreciates, it's deathly quiet. Now, as we work through these cycles of appreciation and depreciation, and it evens out, as we have seen over the past year, how will we look to dissipate anxiety and fear? How will we look to keep those communication channels open so that fear, and this is a part of this process, that fear can be reduced across the country? And I'd like to ask the Minister to take this one.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Keith. I expect over time that we will get there, and it definitely will be a process. But a part of it is going to have to include broader, deeper, and better communication. Under an independent central bank, the Bank of Jamaica is going to have to be substantially changed with respect to communication. I like to, and I've said it publicly, critique the bank for not even having a Twitter account. Even the Queen in Buckingham Palace tweets when they have relevant information to get out. But our palace here doesn't even have a Twitter account. Well, let me tell you one thing. Under an independent central bank, they're going to have all the social media platforms, and they're going to have to be constantly communicating to the Jamaican people. I believe that we've all seen that BOJ has stepped up its communication in recent times, but that evolution we can expect to continue. So Keith, as we have more communication and more data that's available, understanding will improve, and the ability for misinformation to take root will gradually reduce. Over the summer, we had a lot of misinformation that was being coming through the tubes almost on a nightly basis.
Yes.
With persons saying things that were untrue, not factual, not based in any substance, but we were none the wiser because we didn't have access to data or information for ourselves as citizens that would allow us to verify as the case, or not verify as the case may be, what we were being told. Right. I mean, I'll give you the classic example would be with the auctions that the central bank conducts. The central bank has to have a method of interacting with the market as far as foreign exchange is concerned. And what we have today is a much improved system in that it is transparent. Everybody knows what the prices are, and it is fair and equitable because it's an auction system. So the central bank, when it needs to buy or sell, it goes to its authorized dealers, and there are over 40 of them, and it says, look, I intend to buy or I intend to sell $5 million. And it says, look, you tell me the price at which you are willing to sell me when I'm buying, and I being the central bank, or tell me the price at which you're willing to buy from me when I'm selling, and then we're going to choose the best ones. So that's the process that exists. Yet we had people on national sort of television giving a narrative. The central bank is out there buying at this rate and that rate.
And we have just introduced the BOJ auction mechanism, fix it. It's a